Tonight's sponsors include the WABE radio station, as well as the Georgia Tech Library e-page service and the Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you Dan Reardon.
Thank you. So I talked to a couple different folks about what it is you all would like to hear me speak about, and I got 5 different answers. I asked 5 people, I got 5 different answers, so I'm going to shoot for the middle. And I will tell you that I work a lot better if people bark out questions, so please interrupt me along the way. You don't have to wait till the end. I was told to leave some time at the end for questions, so I will do that. And I'll try to pace myself. If I get carried away, then you guys just cut me off at some point. I'm assuming a lot of you don't know completely about North Highland, so I got a slide around North Highland. I'm going to cover that pretty quick. And then I have a couple slides here on lessons I learned my first couple years out of tech. So I did my undergraduate college of management. And the first couple of years were kind of exciting for me. I did a lot of different things and saw a lot of people crash and burn, and I saw some people be successful. So I was reflecting back on that, so I'm going to hit, I called it building your brand because it's really building that personal brand your first couple of years out of university. So if that strikes a chord with you guys, I can spend more time on that or less time on it. We can circle back to what North Highland's all about and what we're doing. We've got a couple of cool strategies in place that are worth looking at as well, if that's what you guys want to do. So real quick, and I'll try to stand out of your way from the slides as well. We're a global management and technology consulting company, heavy to the management side of that. We started out here in Atlanta 18 years ago and grew pretty rapidly. Several years, 100% growth, and then it kind of started snowballing. We opened offices in other cities. We got a couple of interesting differentiators in that we try to be extremely local wherever we are. So the folks in Atlanta call on companies in Atlanta and try to do work in Atlanta. So we will travel for a client, but we won't travel to get a client. So that's a big differentiator compared to the other firms that are out there. We're completely privately owned. In fact, we're 100% owned by our employees through something called an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan, which is also pretty unique. And the one down at the bottom is kind of cool because about 4 years ago, I'm ashamed to tell you there's actually a magazine for our industry called Consulting Magazine, of all things, and I'd never seen it. And 4 years ago, somebody showed it to me, and it had a best place to work thing in there, a survey in there. So we said, what the hell, let's go ahead and we did a write-in. We weren't on the drop-down list. And we came in 4th. They say it's international, but it's pretty heavily based in the United States. So we did it again the next year. We came in 3rd, and then we did it again last year. I think we came in 3rd again, something like that. So we've been in the top 4 for the last 4 years behind Bain and McKinsey. So that's kind of cool for a firm that we just started 18 years ago. All right, so stuff I learned along the way. And I'll give you stuff that worked well for me, and I'll also share, as I said before, folks that I watched crash and burn, make a few strategic errors in their early years. And the whole notion is around building this brand, and I've noticed distinctly in the people that we hire, the first 90 days. You build your brand in the first 90 days. People form their opinions of you in that first, which isn't fair. It's completely unfair. Absolutely unfair. But it's a fact, at least at our company. Maybe nobody else does this. I suspect it's true everywhere then. So your reputation is built in those first 90 days, and then, quite frankly, you can screw up after that, and you're forgiven because you've already built that brand. So it's pretty amazing, completely unfair, but it just is. All right, so we'll hit some of these. Get a good foundation. One of the things that I did, which I look back on now and thought, well, that was, in hindsight, that worked out pretty well for me. My first job was at Arthur Andersen doing auditing, accounting work. And I didn't like it. Now, I liked accounting well enough. I took accounting here. I took enough of it to get a job there. but it wasn't what I was put on the earth to do. It turns out I was dyslexic, and dyslexics and accounting don't marry up very well. But what it did teach me was how businesses operate, how it all works. Because I went in every single department of a company in order to audit it, and I learned exactly how every transaction happens, what happens in marketing, what happens in shipping, what happens in receiving, what happens in accounting, the whole bit. So that first job, the only thing I'd encourage you to do is the role that you're playing in that job, I would go for as wide a net as you can cast, as opposed to a job where you get to do, a small task or a small section of a business versus something that exposes you to a bigger section of the company. Because the more you can get an understanding of exactly how it all works, the more you can leverage that knowledge later, and that becomes very valuable later on. This is the biggest thing that I see people screw up on. Ask for more responsibility. A lot of folks that we've hired, and I watched my peers even when I started with Arthur Andersen, just kind of sit back and wait to be told what to do. And I can tell you, as a supervisor, as a boss, you don't want to be telling people what to do all the time. You want people to be coming to you saying, what else can I take off your plate? So to the extent that you can get done what you've been asked to do, and then go and ask, can I do a little bit more? And the other thing I would encourage you to do is figure out what the people one level above you are doing, and then just start figuring out a way to start doing that work. Whatever it is, whatever role you're in, just ask for more responsibility that one level above where you are, and start doing the work. We had a guy come to us, this has actually happened several times over the years, say, I want to be a leader, so promote me into a leadership position. And we all laugh. We laughed when I was at Arthur Andersen. We laugh at North Highland, because you can't promote somebody to make them a leader. They have to be a leader before you promote them. And the way you know if you're a leader is if you turn around and people are following you, then you're a leader. So we wait for people to prove that in their job before we would ever give them that kind of responsibility. But we'll test them a little bit along the way. So the more you ask for this kind of stuff, the more the people you're working with are going to say, wow, they are looking for more, they want more, they're eager for more, and they seem to have the capacity to take more, so you're going to get more responsibility. This one's really interesting. I had an opportunity a year and a half after I went to work at Arthur Andersen to move. I didn't have an opportunity. I actually met a woman, and I wanted to get out of audit. This dyslexic thing was catching up to me, and I was transposing all these numbers all the time, 24 million, 48 million, whatever. And so I knew I had to get out of audit. Arthur Andersen had just launched this new consulting division, and I wanted to get into consulting. So I asked them for a transfer, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't give me a transfer out of audit. But I met this woman, and or a girl at the time. She was in university, and she was in London, and I thought, well, that'd be really cool. And they told me I could go get a job. The consulting division had started up in San Francisco, London, and Minneapolis. And no offense to anybody from Minneapolis, but that one got eliminated pretty quickly, and it was between San Francisco and London. And since I'd met this young lady, I moved over to London. And I was talking to some of my peers at the time, so I'm a year and a half out of university. And some of my friends had already bought a house, and they started falling in love with their house. And it kept them from being able to do so many things that I could do, because I was in an apartment, so I just canceled my apartment. The biggest priority I had in the move was how to fit these big speakers we used to have back when I was in college. I had these mega speakers, and I shipped them all the way over to London, probably played them twice in the 2 years I was there, then shipped them all the way back and kept them in my basement for a while. But the take chances is, if you're given an opportunity to move around, do it. Because especially if you can do it internationally. What I learned 2 years in London was staggering compared to what I would have learned if I'd stayed in the Atlanta office of Arthur Andersen. I got to experience the different cultures. I got to experience a completely different type of work that they were doing over there. It's interesting, because I don't know about your parents. My parents had this mantra of buy a house. It's how you make money. Invest your earnings, buy a house. Don't buy a house. Do not buy a house your first couple of years out, because you need that freedom. Somebody offers you a job to go out to California, do it. Somebody offers you a job to go to Spain, do it. London, do it. Australia, whatever. China, just grab that. Do it for 2 years and then come back. because the advantage that gives you, not just from the experience, but the learning how to operate in a different culture makes you operate better in your own culture. It just gives you an awareness that you're not going to get if you just stay put. So the biggest thing, and this happens, I still see this today. We just opened an office in Shanghai last year. I asked 3 people to move over there. Huge opportunity for them to run our office over there. All 3 of them turned me down because they didn't want to sell their house, sell their cars, take their kids out of school, and stuff like that. I think when you have kids, it's probably different, but judging with this crowd, I don't think that's much of an issue for you guys. So I would rent as long as you can. Just keep yourself free to move. This kind of goes back to the ask for more responsibility, but to always do more. If you're given a task, so I'm still in this 90-day window in your first 90 days or first year even. If you're asked to do something, do it and then do a little bit more. Because that's all about building the brand kind of mentality. And then people will seek you out. So particularly in consulting, it's very project oriented. So you want people on your project that are just going to get it done. Because that's all you care about. We got to get in there, we got to get it done, we got to get paid, and then we got to go on and figure out how else to satisfy the client. So if you've got folks that are always doing a little bit more than what you ask, those are the people you want on the team. And those are the people who get the rock star brand put on them, and those are the people who are always the first ones staffed in our environment, always. This is probably the hardest one for some people, because some people, it gets into how your brain works. So some people are linear thinkers, some people are more creative thinkers. But to get breakthrough ideas, whether you're working in industry or working in consulting, the concept of new ideas, inevitably, the majority of those are going to come from different experiences that people have had. And some people can't think that way. They just think through their own, well, this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way I was taught to do it, and this is how my boss did it. And you just don't come up with new ideas that way. You come up with little marginal changes. But the ability to look for the patterns, and the patterns are not the patterns within my own world, the patterns are across worlds. So, for example, I'll give you a downside to our industry. I think it's actually could potentially really cripple the consulting industry, is we are predominantly organized by industry. So there's a whole segment in the consulting world called healthcare consulting, and all they do is consult to healthcare companies. That's all they ever talk to is healthcare companies. And as you've probably read, our healthcare system is in the crapper right now because there's been decades of bad advice given to the healthcare industry because they've never adopted any of the new thinking that's done in all the other industries out there. So you look at an emergency room, I see an emergency room, I see what looks like an auto repair center. It looks like Pep Boys to me. You don't know what the problem's going to be when it comes in. You got to have enough parts to handle the high frequency stuff, and you got to get them fixed, quit leaking, and get them back out the door. It looks like a job shop environment. Why not apply job shop environment techniques into an emergency room? Because none of the healthcare consultants who advise the healthcare industry have ever worked in an industrial setting and know what a job shop environment is. So you don't get those kind of crossover ideas. So that's where you got to look for the patterns, suggest a plan, risk being wrong. There's a lot worse things happening in your life than being wrong. But the fact that you're looking across things and suggesting ideas is very powerful. Go for it.
Do you suggest a plan, or do you act on that and maybe show people later? Do you suggest, or you do?
I'd suggest you suggest. It depends on where you are. So if you're in your first year out of here and you're joined a company, before you start doing, I'd run it by somebody, because what if it's a really crappy idea and you get it completely wrong and you cost the company a whole bunch of money? That wouldn't do too good for your brand. So I'd run it by. But you got to be really careful who you run it by, because if you run it by the people who are put on the earth to kill ideas, then you're not going to get anywhere. So, I mean, part of that spider sense that you need to figure out when you get your job is who are the folks who are implementers of change and who are the folks who are killers of change. Because some people, change just scares the crap out of them, and they don't want to be part of it. So you got to pick who you run it by. So that's a tough challenge.
So you say that you should like crispy, you know, in the first 90 days, but when people start forming opinions about you, if you're wrong, you know, like short time frame.
If it's a good idea, I mean, there are great ideas that are still wrong. They may not be right now, or they may be off 5 degrees, but the fact that you're bringing ideas to the table is still pretty cool. And I would gauge what you're bringing with where you are and how long you've been. So in your first 90 days, I wouldn't suggest you kick open the CEO's door and say, here's the new strategy I think the whole company should be doing. But within your environment, how about here's an interesting way of streamlining this. Or have we ever thought of this as a tangential project? Any other questions? I don't mean to say you ought to revolutionize things, but it's kind of how you progress through the company as well. So first 90 days, I wouldn't do anything nuclear. But as you've been there longer, I would bring the idea should have more and more and more weight to them. All right. It's my biggest pet peeve. I can't tell you how many books I have in my office where people have told me, this is a great book, you ought to read it. Well, you know, I got a lot of other shit to do today than read this book, you know. Pardon my French. What would be really powerful is if you read it and you thought it was really great, and I get all these magazine articles, and I mean, I can't tell you how much stuff I get sent with the encouragement that I should read this. And if you've read it and you think it's really great, then summarize it down to 3 paragraphs and give that to me. Don't give me the book. I don't want to read 300 pages to figure out if you know what something that I would think is good is or not, but I'll read 3 paragraphs any day of the week, something I can read pretty quick. It also, it tells me you're willing to take a little bit more risk as well. Because now if you write it up, then I get to figure out, well, what did you think was cool about the book? Because I may think something else was cool. And if I like your 3 paragraphs, odds are I'll read the book. I've probably got 100 books in my office that I haven't read yet, and I'm never going to read them. You know, unless 3 or 4 or 5 people tell me I got to read that book, I'm not going to read them. But if somebody writes it up and tells me it's really great, which happened, there's a book I'd actually encourage everybody here to read it. I won't tell you what it's about, but you ought to read it. It's called True Professionalism. True Professionalism. It's by a guy named Meister, Dave Meister. He writes a lot about law firms and consulting and stuff, but it's really about how to be a professional. And it's probably a 20-year-old book. And somebody handed me that book with the summary on it. And I read the summary and thought, well, that's really cool, because we want to teach our consultants how to be professionals. That's what the industry is all about. And I would argue pretty strongly the industry is moving away from being a professional, and it's moving into other not nearly as esteemed words. And then I went back and I read the whole book. And it's a great book because every page has got an idea on it. And within the middle of that page, it's summarized in 1 sentence in bullet points. So all you have to do is read that one little bullet point, and if you understand it, you don't have to read the whole page. So you can speed read the thing very quickly. But it talks about behaviors of being a professional, and so I'll throw that one out to you. It's a book you ought to read. What else we got? Leadership style. So I threw this in here toward the end because one of the things I learned, one of the things I learned is you have to manage differently depending on the environment you're in. And it changes dramatically. So I joined North Highland when it was 20 people. So I left Arthur Andersen, it was 40-something thousand people at the time globally, and joined this 20-person company that was just hokey. I mean, it was really small, and the founder's a great guy. He's a super entrepreneur, and he did a fantastic job. But the leadership style then was fundamentally different than the leadership style now. So if you got 20 people, let's say 20 to 50 people, the leadership style is sort of benevolent dictator and all hands on deck. It's sort of a mother hen with wings, and all the little chicks are underneath the wings, and that's your management style, because you're so small that you really want to know what everybody's doing every day, and you want to tell them what to do every day. You get up to about 100 folks, and you need to start to mature that management style, because it's physically impossible for you to know what everybody's doing every day. So it actually broke our system when I joined North Highland. We grew very fast those first couple of years. So we had to divide up into 3 of us running the company. So that's when I got my first real shot at leadership. It was about a year later. So I had about a third of 100 people that I was responsible for. Then the next year we were 200 people, so I had a third of 200 people. And what I noticed over the evolution of that is as you add more people, you have to start doing less yourself and directing through other people. So the year I became president of North Highland, I've probably been there about 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. And we needed to go through a pretty dramatic shift in our culture. We needed to go from kind of a looser chaos theory approach that the founder and I joke about to more of an accountability model. So I had to I jokingly say I took the company by the throat as the leader. I wanted to know everything that was going on, and we were going to change the way we do stuff. And then we started growing again. And I realized I'm either going to die or have a heart attack because it's just too much, and you can't do that. So your style has to shift to working through other folks. So promoted some folks, gave them responsibility, and now all I have to care about is the people that I work directly with, not the hundreds of folks underneath them. And when you join an organization, you're going to join somewhere in this whole spectrum. So it goes all the way up to these 100,000 person companies. The leadership style just keeps moving down that spectrum. But it operates on a department level, a division level, accounts payable department level. I mean, it works the whole way down through the organization. So when you join your employer, you got to look at, well, how big is this group that I'm in? If it's a 5-person group, you're going to be in more of that chaos theory, high touch, I can talk to my boss whenever I want to kind of environment, multiple times a day. We can chat about what's going on. If you join a group that's got 100 people, the odds of you talking to your boss every day are pretty slim. So you need to gauge your interaction with that group with where you are on the spectrum. All right, I think this is my last one. The biggest takeaway that I've got, so I've been doing this for 22 years, 23 years, I'm 45. I would read as many books as you can about how people behave, so how the brain works. How yours works is interesting, how other people's works is much more interesting, because you get reactions from people. You can say stuff that you think is pretty benign and they get really upset, and you can't figure out what did I do and why did they get upset. And it's probably got nothing to do with you, it's got everything to do with them. So it all gets into psychology and that kind of stuff. But the more you can understand how humans work, the more you can interact better with humans. So I can ask, how do you think about something? And I can get you to think sort of somewhat more linearly. I can ask, how do you feel about that? The exact same topic. How do you think about that versus how do you feel about that? And I can access a completely different part of your brain and get a completely different reaction from you just by what word choice I use. And that's pretty powerful stuff if you know how that works and how people react to that.
How do you feel about Myers-Briggs, the DISC model, the Hickman Brain Index, all of those more
Right. I've done probably 20 different versions of those, all the ones you mentioned and a couple more. The more the merrier. I mean, they're all insights into you. The trouble is, so you did Myers-Briggs, I did Myers-Briggs. I read What I Am, INTJ. I read that 20 times. I didn't read what the other 15 people were. And that's the trick, because you got to know how everybody else is, and they need to know how you are. So you get back to pitching ideas, you got to know when to pitch and how to pitch, depending on who you're pitching to. So the more you can figure out how to phrase things and how, if you see somebody's reacting to something you're saying, then stop and shift how you're saying it. But to know that stuff, just to read about it and learn about that stuff is very powerful. There's definitely an ethical issue there. Use it the right way. Don't use it to manipulate people, but use it to enforce your views of what you're trying to express to folks. So that's what I had. They said shoot for about 20, 25, 30 minutes, and then ask questions. So that was my big learnings. Somebody had a question over here.
Let's get a microphone.
Alan's one over here as well.
Great talk. One quick question. Management consulting is typically something that companies spend on a discretionary basis. So how has the recession impacted the management consulting industry, and what's your outlook for the next 2 to 5 years?
It's an interesting question because it would depend on the sector of consulting. So Accenture had a pretty good year last year, and so did IBM, because their projects are so huge. You know, if you sell a $100 million project, it's going to take you a couple of years to do it. So they're kind of burning through their backlog, but they didn't sell a whole bunch of $100 million projects in 2009. So they're going to feel it more this year, whereas we felt it January of 2009. 2009 was really quite a year for us because 2008 was fantastic. December was the best December we'd ever had. We went into January on the holidays and everything. We had great backlog, more than we'd ever had. And then we came back to work in January, and clients just started calling up and canceling projects. Just don't show up. In the middle of the contract, just stop and don't show up. So the first half of last year was not fun. But we built it back up in the second half, and we're actually just had the best January we've ever had. And February is some of the highest stats, utilization stats we've ever had. So it started in September. We started seeing client engagement on topics, and then by November we were writing proposals, and in December we were closing work, and so it's picked up a lot. I think the reason behind that is that a lot of the companies have realized, you know, this is it. You got to make the best of what it is now, what the economy is now. And there may be 10% unemployment, but there's 90% employment, and those 90% are going to spend money, and we need to fight over who they're going to spend money with. So whether it's Coca-Cola or AT&T, both substantial clients of ours, they've got to figure out how we're going to win in this environment. So the work has shifted. We're not seeing big systems as much as we're seeing marketing strategies and operational efficiency. Just kind of come around again. The most amazing thing about our industry, I'll tell trade secrets, Alan, but so I've been doing this, I guess, 23 years since I'm 45. The stuff I was doing 22 years ago is still the stuff we're doing now. We just call it different. You know, it was re-engineering for a while. Now it's transformation. But fundamentally, it's the same type of activity. So it looks like we keep reinventing ourselves, but the reality is we're taking stuff we already knew how to do, and we're just putting a little bit of new trimming on it and calling it something else.
Now that we're becoming more and more aware of the bottom line effect of stress on our corporations, everything from burnout to illness to miscommunication, have you started having clients ask you to work with them on developing a stress reduction infrastructure for their corporation?
I haven't heard of that one, but I thought you were going to head somewhere else. For years, we were trying to sell change management with all of our projects, and you couldn't give it away. In fact, we had to give it away. We would call it something else. We'd say, oh, well, that's a process person, but they were really a change management person. And now clients are coming to us saying, we need change management. So it's a recognition of the stress, I think, in the system, the difficulty of getting people to change what they're doing, and I think the advancement of some of the knowledge about how humans actually work and being able to apply that in a work environment. So it's probably one of our biggest areas that is around change management. Tomorrow I'll start pitching stress reduction workshops. Somebody else?
Okay, why don't you go ahead back there?
You mentioned building yourself as a brand within an organization within your first 90 days, but as continue to do so. As you move up in that organization or take different managerial roles, how do you continue to build on that brand to increase, I guess, output for yourself and everybody around you?
I think it's the same way. Keep trying to do more than what the job is defined as. I've never met a boss who got upset because somebody was doing their work. And if you do the work of your boss, then you're going to get more accolades, you're going to get more responsibility thrown on you. I think where most people get get backwards with it is they say, well, pay me for it first, then I'll do the work. And once you do that, you're out of the game, as far as I'm concerned. Because I want to know if you can do it before I promote you and put you in that spot. So it's every step of the way. We just promoted some people in my organization to a much more significant level of responsibility, and I started hinting at them last year that that was an opportunity for them, and they started taking work away from me. And that's great. Now they got it all. So I think that applies every step of your career, forever.
You talked about building a brand, at least within a company or within an organization. Do you have any advice for building a brand, maybe within an industry or outside of a specific company that you're working with? Maybe even to define clients yourself as an individual or as a company?
It's an interesting question and I think it depends on where you work. Because some organizations would think that was pretty cool, and some organizations would be a little nervous about that. Building an individual brand. So if I worked at Procter & Gamble and I went out and started building my individual brand as an awesome Procter & Gamble employee to the outside world, I don't know that they would think that that was so cool versus building it inside the organization. So I think it depends versus if you're a service business, if you're in consulting, a lot of what we do is that, build that brand outside of the organization because that brings more interest to the organization. As long as you link yourself with the company you're working for, you're probably pretty safe. If you try to do it like moonlighting, I do talks and seminars outside of work, probably not such a cool idea. So I hate to tell you that, but my answer would be it depends. So.
What's your personal brand and how has it evolved over time and how have you developed it over time?
So this is a challenge because my daughter's sitting here and I've told my wife that I wasn't a workaholic for 20-something years, but I over-delivered pretty consistently. I found the work very enjoyable. So if you love what you do, it's easy to do it. And I usually think about it in the shower in the morning. I'm thinking about it when I'm going to sleep at night, and I just come in the morning and I'll tell folks, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? So my brand would be around getting it done. If you got a problem and you want it done, then I can get it done. There's two of my kids are dyslexic, so we learned a lot about that, and they call it the gift of dyslexia, which means you usually get something else. So you got something taken away, you're going to get something else as well. So that one I put up there about seeing patterns, I see patterns everywhere. I see random data and make them into patterns. So it's different than seeing patterns. So I can take this cross-industry stuff, and I just play with that all day long and come up with brand new stuff for our clients. So I don't know if you can just make yourself do that by practicing or what, but it just comes naturally to me.
Hi. You mentioned earlier that you opened an office in Shanghai recently. So my question is, how have you had to change your leadership and managerial styles to conform to their Confucius beliefs? And my other question is, how do you think globalization has affected the consulting business in general? And where do you think?
Two questions are, how do you change your style for other cultures? Yes. And how is globalization going to affect management consulting or everybody?
Just management consulting.
All right. So the first one's pretty important. You don't have to leave the country to get different cultures. So I grew up in New York and moved down here in high school, moved down to Atlanta. And I would argue in the late 70s when I did that, those were two very different cultures that you need to learn how to operate in. So it's interesting because I was just over in Shanghai talking to the management team over there, and Confucius is a big part of everything that they're doing right now. And I think it gets back to what I said earlier about spend some time in another culture so you can become more aware. So you just have to shut up and listen for the first couple of days you're there and just learn and take it all in, and then before you start espousing stuff, make sure you're able to twist what you're doing into the context that fits within their world. We did have We did have a false start in China because somebody else was working on it, and their style was, let's negotiate it out, get all the facts down, get the lawyers involved first. And they just pushed back from that. And they didn't have anything to do with that. So my approach was to go in there and be much more relationship-based, build the trust. So you have to change your style. One of the styles that is difficult is that they like to continually negotiate. It's a huge stereotype. It held true for me in my dealings. I just wanted to keep haggling, keep haggling, keep haggling. So eventually I had to pull out my very American, let's get it done kind of thing and say, well, why don't we just forget about it and just walk out of the room. So let's just call the deal off. And then the next day it was completely different. And we were able to get it done very quickly. So I think you just have to be very flexible. You have to be very aware and very flexible. And how's globalization affecting the management consulting industry? It depends on your approach to it. So like our competitors went from a local, when I started out at Arthur Andersen and Accenture was the next floor up, we were all locally focused. And then about 5 years later, we went to a regional focus, and then it went to a national focus, and now it's pretty much an international. Most of the big firms focus internationally. I think it's going to be hard to retain folks like you. Everything you read about this generation, y'all don't want to be on the road for the next 5 years living out of hotels. So that's going to put a real hurt on those models. I think the clients are demanding more of a global rollout. So if I look at the companies we work with, Comcast, Coca-Cola, Cox Communications, and Johnson & Johnson, and the big global companies, when they're organizing along global lines, they're forgetting about the borders. So we have to match that, which is why the background stuff on our company. I mean, we were only a U.S.-based company up till about 4 years ago, and decided in order to maintain our relationship and build our position with the Coca-Colas of the world, we have to be able to deploy globally. So we went out and we partnered with some companies and we acquired some companies. But you got to be able to do it.
Excuse me. What's been your most interesting anecdote, experience, client, project with North Highland in the last couple of years?
What's been our most interesting project?
Or client. Or experience?
That's a tough one. Probably the coolest one, and you'll be able to figure out who it is, but I can't tell you who it is. But this whole thing in healthcare, marrying up, there are companies that provide all the back office systems that most healthcare companies run on, particularly the hospitals. Happens to be one pretty close to here, who's a big client of ours. So they're in about half the hospitals in the United States. And one of the things, if you think about everything that's going on in healthcare, we need a better transaction engine to monitor everybody's prescriptions and doctor visits and everything that's going on. So eventually you can show up in an emergency room and they wipe an ATM type card and all your medical records are there. I mean, that's the ultimate that we're all working toward. But there's nobody out there right now that could handle that kind of data. I don't know if you guys are looking at all this smart grid stuff. I mean, all the utilities are getting ready to go from getting data once a month, reading a meter, to getting it once every 8 seconds. And they don't even know what to do with that data. They don't know how to handle it, and they don't have any capability of managing it, absorbing it, and dealing with it. Well, the same thing is true in healthcare. So we married them up with a big bank. Because what banks do, they do a ton of transactions. They keep it clear. When was the last time your bank statement was wrong? And they're able to handle these huge amounts of data. And the really big banks in this country can't get any bigger because they've already hit their limit. So they're looking for new areas to get into. So for us, it's a lot of fun if you can take two clients and introduce them to each other and suggest that they form a relationship, which these two did, and you think you've just birthed a billion-dollar industry where there's nobody else there. So that's probably the coolest thing we did in the last year. And get paid for doing it.
Yeah, I was wondering if you think that maybe your philosophy of overworking and overstepping your responsibilities a little bit might excuse me, might ever lead to tension among your peers in the workplace, that they might think that, you know, in the sense that you're brown-nosing, you know, trying to step on them a little bit, and, you know, if so, how do you avoid that?
That's a great question, because you are. You are going to piss them off, probably. It's a tough call. I mean, most companies, I guess it depends on the culture there. I mean, certainly the ones I grew up with were a pretty competitive environment. Certainly the big consulting firms, when we started, I remember the day I started, there was 12 people in my start group, and the guy running the class said, in 10 years, only one of you will be here. So every year, you'll either quit or be fired, but this group will go from 12 to 1 over 10 years. So you knew you were entering into a pretty competitive environment. I think you just have to balance that. If you go overboard, you will look like, you know, a big brown noser. But there's a big difference between sucking up for the sake of sucking up and, gee, I really like your tie today. Boy, those trousers look fantastic on you. Versus, you know, have we thought about this line of business? Have we thought about this product? Have we thought about doing this a little different way? I think they're pretty dramatically different. Plus, what I find is if you're really good, people will keep you busy. They're going to ask you to do more work. So there's an interesting cultural difference. When I went to work in London, I just thought it was normal that you stayed until it was done. But my colleagues in London said, well, I've got theater tickets, and it's, you know, it's 6 o'clock, and they left, and I'd be there till 8 o'clock at night getting it done because it had to be done in the morning. And to them, some of the cultural attributes were more important than getting the work done. And that wasn't what they taught me at Arthur Andersen in the first 2 years, so I didn't know any better. Now I'd argue more time at the theater would have been good for me in those early years, getting a little bit more culture. The other thing, I'll warn you guys, because this is a tough one when you first get out of school. There will always be, and Alan can tell you this as well, there will always be an open bar at a company function. There will always be an open bar. All right? It's free. That doesn't mean you have to get your money's worth and drink everything in that bar, because it's a trap. And we openly talk about it, because we had some folks that drank too much at a company meeting. We thought, well, maybe we should take the liquor away. I said, hell no, don't take the liquor away. Make it more available, because I want to know who's stupid enough to get, you know, fall down drunk at a company meeting in front of me. I can't tell you how many people would walk up to me and decide they want to have an argument with me in the middle of the meeting, and they're pointing with their drink, and the gin's falling out and splashing on me. Now, how good is that for your career? I had a guy drop a beer bottle on my foot because it just slipped out of his hand because he was too wasted to hang on to his drink. And they seek me out at the company meetings. It's like, what is the matter with you people? You know, I mean, how can that not come up in a promotion meeting or a pay raise meeting? And we had this big debate at work as to whether that should be evaluative or not, because they weren't really on the job. It was 10 o'clock at night in the evening after a company meeting. And I will tell you, 100% of what you do at work or with your colleagues is evaluative. Even if you're out drinking after work with a bunch of colleagues and you're just out having a good time, that's evaluative. If you do something incredibly stupid, it will impact your job. It's just the realities of life.
You're always on the record, so to speak.
Yeah.
We have a question over there.
What do you think kind of differentiates your company from a recruiting perspective from some of the other big consulting firms?
The biggest thing would be the quality of life. We just have a fundamentally different model in the sense of being based in an office and you serve that general area. And travel, if our clients need you to travel, then you travel, but you're not going to travel to go find a client. And we don't do work in cities that we're not in unless a client asks us to go there. So I think far and away that would be the biggest difference. That, and we're not time and grade. So I mean, typical consulting is 2 years as a consultant, 2 years as a senior consultant, 2 years, 3 years as a manager, 2 years as a senior manager, then boom, 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 and we don't do that. It's all based on capability. Now, as it happens, most people tend to follow that general path because there's a reason why the big firms do that, but if you're really good, you can do it faster. You called on somebody else, sorry.
Two questions. The first kind of builds on the earlier question. You have a very different model as a consulting company. Have you seen other firms begin to emulate some of what you're doing because it works, or do you see any kind of, I guess, recognition across the rest of the industry that maybe this is a model that we perhaps should adopt? And then the second question, if you were not leading North Highland, what would you be doing?
I'm glad you asked the first one first, so it buys me a little time to think about the second one. There's two answers to your first question. People emulated our model. And interestingly, two groups have. Some of the big consulting companies have tried, but they can't sustain it. Because there are economic variables in our model that an Accenture or Deloitte or stuff are not going to live through. You got to stick with it long enough to come out the other side and get the value back again. So like one of our big economic engines of our model is our retention rate is dramatically higher than the other firms. So they lose 30% of their people a year, which is incredibly expensive. We lose 10% of our people every year, 5% through forced and 5% through voluntary. That has a big economic impact in knowledge about our clients and knowledge about our company and how we do stuff. So we save a ton of money. We lose money because we can't leverage the whole system. So if we need work done in Nashville and they're sold out and we've got somebody in LA, and the other models, you just tell a person to get on a plane and go do it. So you maximize your economics. In our model, we can't do that because our travel is voluntary. So if nobody in LA is willing to go, and we just deal with that. We live with that revenue loss. We also lose revenue because we don't have an office in Memphis, and somebody calls us up from Memphis and wants us to do work. We say, sorry, we're not in Memphis. What would I do if I wasn't doing this? I think it depends on if I needed to work or not. If I need to make money, I'd be doing something a lot like this because I really love my job. I love consulting because of the variety, and I love working at North Highland because we're growing so fast and it's so exciting. And I'm launching sister companies that feed on the ecosystem, and it's pretty cool. So if they fire me tomorrow, then I'd probably go start a competitor and do it again. Somebody right here.
For a person that wants to have a career in management consulting, like in U.S., do you think it's better to join a firm right out of college or to get experience in the industry somewhere and then join?
I joined right out of college. Because your probability of getting hired right out of college is a lot higher than getting hired out of industry. Because their mentality is to go on campus, unless you're trying to get a job at North Highland, in which case I'd go get a job at somebody else's consulting company and then call us afterwards, because we don't do very much undergraduate hiring.
So that experience is not valuable if someone gets industry experience?
You didn't ask me that question. You said if you want to do management consulting, should I go work here or here? I think the experience is very valuable. But it's harder to get hired into a Deloitte or Bearing Point, not Bearing Point, they're kind of gone, Accenture, Ernst & Young, Capgemini. It's harder to get hired into that from industry than it is straight off campus. Just from a percentages game, they scoop up tons of people off campus every year, and they bring in a small number of people from the industry, and they tend to be much more experienced people from industry that they bring in. So, but what you could do is go do industry for a while, which I think is very valuable, and then go get an MBA, say here, and then come back and do consulting when you graduate from the master's. That's very powerful. That's more powerful than going undergraduate straight into an MBA and then trying to get a job. That industry experience would be much better.
You had mentioned,
like that plug, Jim? Thanks. I'll get my $5 later.
You had mentioned earlier in your presentation about not being scared to be wrong, taking that risk.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get your opinion or a strategy on how do you give an idea where you know there's a lot of demerits to it, but it may have some merits in the idea.
Point out the demerits first. or second or weave them in, but you need to, any idea you're presenting, you should present, here's what I think is really good, and here are the parts that either I don't know, or I hadn't figured out, or somebody other than me should look at to see if this thing still makes sense, but point out what you don't know, which is a really powerful word. So I grew up in an environment where you never said, I don't know. At Arthur Andersen, you just didn't do that. That was a career-limiting move to say, I don't know. And I think that is beyond stupid. Because you should say, I don't know. It's very powerful. Because I can spend an hour with any one of you, and at the end of that hour, I'll know pretty much what you're good at and what you're not good at. And if you start pretending to be good at stuff that we all know, that everybody who works with you knows that you're not good at, then how can I trust that you know what you're not good at? And how can I trust that you'll then shore it up? But if you can say, look, this is what I'm good at and this is what I'm working on, then I get an extreme amount of confidence that you're going to surround yourself with other folks who are good at the stuff that you're not good at, and you're going to shore it up. If you try to bluff, the odds are against you in pulling that off.
Yeah. As we all know, Toyota brand almost collapsed overnight. So if you were tasked with helping them out, what would you recommend?
Give me the first bit. I was trying to figure out who was talking, so I missed your first sentence.
First is Toyota brand almost collapsed overnight. So if you were tasked with helping them out, so what would you recommend?
You know what the Arthur Andersen brand?
Toyota.
Oh,
Toyota brand.
Well, the Toyota brand collapsed overnight. What would we tell them to do? How long you got? Unfortunately, they already didn't do a bunch of things that they should have done. They should have come at it with a lot more honesty, a lot quicker, and the CEO should have been the face man for that, and he didn't. So they're already hurt themselves pretty bad. So if I were them right now, I would probably go to social media. I would make fun of myself through and use the internet and do some spoof ads, and just the best way to get people to stop making fun of you is to make fun of yourself. I have an Irish wife. She taught me that. If I say something bad about myself, then I take the steam out of everybody else. Nobody else can make fun of me because I've already cut myself down. But Toyota could do the same thing by being very humble, and then build back up from there and prove it. And then I'd come out with some killer cars. I mean, they need to crank up the R&D lab and come out with something really cool. And as you've all proven, you like really cool. I mean, why did the iPod, the whole Apple, I mean, that company theoretically was almost out of business, and came back overnight because they came out with really cool products. And we have a big debate. If Apple stops coming out with cool products, will they still be the company that they are right now, or will they crash and burn as quickly as they did before? And I'll put my money on you guys will stop buying their stuff, and they will crash and burn overnight if they stop coming out with new stuff every 6 months. Because somebody else will come out with something really cool. And I don't think there's as much loyalty to companies as much anymore as there is to the product, the cool product. So Toyota's better positioned than anybody else on this planet to come out with a really cool car, because they have the technology for it.
And we have time for 2 more questions. We'll take one back there. And one over here.
I have a question. You said that the main difference between North Highland and some other consulting firms is the quality of life required. As North Highland continues to grow, do you expect that to change, or do you expect the model to be
I expect it to stay the same. So if I look at, our growth will come from growing the offices we have and growing more offices. We're in 17 cities. We'll be in 25 cities in the next couple of years in the States, and then the rest of the world. And we've got about 200 folks here in Atlanta. So if I do the math and say, well, it works great at 200 folks, odds are it will go to 300, but just stick with 200. So if we get 200 people in Charlotte and 200 people in Nashville and 200 people in New York and 200 people in all 17 of those cities, then I can grow significantly. And I know it works at 200. So it should work 200 multiple places. Then I open up a bunch more offices and get those up to 200. So it should work. I could get into the philosophical reason why, but I'll give you the real condensed version. Is I think if you demand quality work and demand honorable work out of people, then you'll get honorable quality work out of people. And people want to work in that kind of environment. And so ethics is a huge deal for us. Do the right thing is what we always talk about. Even if we lose money doing it, it's still the right thing to do. And so you wind up surrounding yourself with that people. And I have a personal belief that humans want to do the right thing. It's always the hardest thing to do. Whenever we're faced with a choice, doing the right thing is always harder than doing the sort of less right thing. But if you just beat that drum, then everybody wants to be in that kind of environment. So I think it's self-propelling.
Is the way you treat your employees related to their performance, or do you just have equally good performance among happy workers?
So the way we define treat, do you mean pay or do you mean just
No,
hang out?
essentially there's the intrinsic and the extrinsic rewards, and your differentiator is that people don't travel, 4 days a week and go back and forth. You said that was one of the differentiators of your company, to attract employees and to retain employees.
Right.
And so the question is that directly translatable to the quality of work that you provide for your clients?
Well, I think it is. So I'm going to answer a little bit more than what you asked, because I'll give you a great example. I spent 2 years in Mansfield, Ohio. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Mansfield, Ohio. There's not a lot there. Are you from there? Those are some winners. That's all I'll say. I mean, and I had 2 kids at home. And all I kept thinking about as I'm cranking out work at this telecom company is, I just want to be home. So, but I got to finish the project. I was running the project, and on Thursday, you're trying to figure out, can I get out of here Thursday night instead of Friday? Do I need to stay till Friday? And on Sunday night or Monday morning, you're not looking to go back. I won't pick on Mansfield, Ohio, but I wasn't looking to go back to Mansfield, Ohio. So that has to impact the quality of your work a little bit, or a lot. It certainly impacts your desire to do the follow-through work, the second project after that. Whereas our local model, you live right down the street. And so there's no Thursday night, Friday dilemma for you. And it gets even more important because a lot of our folks, because they're not traveling, they start coaching sports at night for their kids maybe, or just because they like sports. So you start to get involved in the community. You're going to run into your client at Home Depot or at the Publix or whatever. And so you get this loyalty thing. I'm not just doing the work for North Highland. I'm doing the work for you because you're my friend now, and you're part of my community, and I need you to be successful, because if you're successful, I'm going to have more work. Now, as it happens, we don't do the up or out thing that I mentioned that a lot of our competitors do. We don't do that. So somebody could be a manager at North Highland and stay a manager the rest of their life. All we'd ask is that they're the best manager the industry has ever seen, that they strive to be better and better and better and better. And we have a very variable compensation plan. So some people may have a life situation where they want to work a standard work week and then they need to get home. And other people are willing to work a normal consulting load, which is probably 55 hours a week or something like that. Those people are going to make more money because of the way we've designed our compensation plan. So we've designed it to be variable where you can have that quality of life. It's going to cost you some on your compensation, which allows us to be able to flex that up and down some.
One other question, and then we'll end. What happens when a consulting firm needs a consulting firm?
I absolutely pity them, because to be on the other side of the table is so much fun. So, I mean, I just hired a company in November to come in as a consulting firm, HR consulting firm, to come in. And I just gave them every sarcastic line that's ever been fed to me, trying to sell work by cheeky clients, and just enjoyed the moment. And you're constantly evaluating them. Is this really the value for dollar? So it can't be fun. I wouldn't want to go do work at McKinsey or Accenture. I wouldn't want to do work for those guys. So that wouldn't be fun.
Thanks for coming out there.
Thank you guys.